Nah, I'm just kidding. Let's talk some Chiefs, guys. Welcome to the Chief of the North on RGR Football. I'm Seth Kaiser, the freshly haircutted Chief in the North. And as ever, we're here to talk some Chiefs. Finally, after a win, those 2 weeks felt like forever. It's been a rough season, but once again, your Kansas City Chiefs are AFC West champions. That's 8 years in a row, tied for the second longest such streak in NFL history. These really are the good days, man. And as ugly as it's looked at times, that's an incredible thing. So, like we do every week, I want to answer some mailbag questions. I want to talk about something that caught my attention during the most recent game, talk about what I might be looking at moving forward this week. It's a bit of an unusual week because next week I'm going to be in sunny Florida, so there will not be a video next week. My deepest apologies, but I'm not that sorry. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I'm sort of sorry, but not really that sorry. So let's take a look at something that fascinated me this week. The Chiefs, obviously, they've sewn up. They're the 3 seed in the AFC, which is a hilarious down year, but I digress. Well, it is an actual down year from winning the Super Bowl the year before. But it is funny the difference between doing this job now and being a fan now versus what it was like a while ago. It's just so interesting, just the stark difference between what I expect. And to be fair, expecting greatness isn't necessarily a bad thing. Anyways, there was one thing in particular that stuck out from this game. I already wrote about it on the Chief of the North newsletter. We're going to talk about it today. And then if I have time, maybe we'll talk about George Karlaftis. I don't think we will, but I do need to talk about him in the near future because him and Charles Omena, who have become such an important part of the Chiefs pass rush, and really how the pass rush operates on a game-to-game basis, it's always going to circle around Chris Jones. He is the sun at the center of that solar system, but how those guys do, it dictates the floor. It dictates the ceiling more so than the floor because Chris Jones is always going to have some wins. He's always going to get some pressure, even if teams are dedicating a ton of time and energy to him. But whether or not the team itself can get more consistent pressure, you need more than one guy to do that. So I want to write about George Karlaftis in the near future. But today I'm going to be talking about the offense because they were a little better. A lot of red zone struggles. Hey, my wife's texting me. I'm very loved. A lot of red zone struggles, things that they need to clean up, something that we've seen before. We've seen in previous years. We've seen this year. Some of it, from my perspective, it was mostly executional in nature, but those are things they need to work on. However, they actually got a few big plays, a few deep balls, a few things that actually flipped the field, moved the needle for the offense. And that was the primary difference from what we've seen in previous weeks. Granted, it was against the Cincinnati defense that has given up a lot of big plays this year. So I'm not sure if they're turning over a new leaf. We're really not going to know until the playoffs. Seems a little late in the season to turn over a new leaf, but hey, we can always hope, right? That's the new season. The real season is upon us, and it's playoff times. But before I talk about the offense a little more in depth and why even just a couple of deep ball shots and even a couple that failed are so important, that's the big thing. Even a couple of deep shots that failed actually do matter in terms of how it sets up the way teams play the Chiefs and then what the Chiefs offense are. But first, let's take a look at some mailbag questions. Jack Attack 4 asks, why is the play calling felt very bad of late? Is this a Matt Nagy or Andy Reid problem? I mean, anytime there's a problem with the offense, ultimately it starts and stops with Andy Reid. There are some differences that one could say are a Matt Nagy thing. It's impossible to know unless you're in the room. I don't know that the play calling as of late has necessarily – the execution is worse than the play calling. I do think we tend to as fans – and so I say this so often that it makes it sound like I think the coaches are never at fault. I think they certainly are for a lot of things. The play calling aspect of it, though, particularly against the Raiders, which would have been the game that this conversation came afterwards, one of the things that I wrote about on the Chief North newsletter was the fact that there were open looks against the Raiders. And then that does speak to play calling. And so it's tough to say that it's a play calling issue when you've got snaps, and we'll go back in time here, when you've got snaps like this one that take advantage of what the Raiders were playing. In this particular case, you see they're playing too deep here. You've got a variant of cover two. Well, you know what? I'm not going to go down that road. We're going to go with zone. We're going to talk about what they're playing on each side. You can see how they're trying to essentially keep too deep here. You trying to flood the underneath routes just a little bit here. Mahomes ends up checking down to Kelsey on this play. This isn't a play call issue. This could have been a much bigger play. You've got guys coming open in rhythm, and Mahomes chooses to check down. It's also one of the reasons why I wrote about the idea that he's not checking down enough. I just don't agree with it because there's too many snaps that looked like this one from the Raiders game. Not as many from the Patriots game. Still a couple, though, where he checked down faster than I would have. But be that as it may, when you see snaps like this, where you end up with, as Mahomes hits his back foot right here. And that's what's important, right? If you're trying to decide whether someone's open, you've got to look at the timing, the structure, the progressions of the play. Someone coming open on the backside immediately before the read has gotten there, that guy's not open. On the flip side, people coming open into zones. And another thing, guys aren't open. Let's say right now, this defender right here on the back end, let's say he were driving on Watson's route right now. He wouldn't really be open. And the reason for that is, or let's say this defender right here was let's say his momentum was taking him this way. Anytime you're dealing with zone coverages in particular, something to always look for, and this is dragging us far afield, but I don't care because this is what this channel's for. Something to always look for is the leverage and momentum and direction of the defender. So let's say this defender right here in the middle of the field, let's say he's moving towards Watson here. Then Watson's not open because by the time Mahomes fires, he's already moving and in front of the ball, and it's a pick, and he takes it back the other way. If this defender underneath, if he's getting depth right now, this isn't nearly as open as it looks because they get depth so quickly. And so that's something to always watch. So anytime you see a screenshot like this one that I've posted here, one thing to always ask yourself, and that's why I tried to make it clear here, the directions guys were moving, is what's the leverage? Where is the defender moving? If you want an example of how important leverage is, think about the Rashee Rice deep ball where he was given outside leverage and was able to move inside. That's how important leverage and the direction someone's moving is in a game where tenths of a second are so important. Space doesn't mean someone's open. In this particular case, though, it does, because look at the way the defenders are moving. None of them are breaking on Watson here. And actually, none of them are breaking the right direction here for MVS either. And I know what you're going to say. Why would he throw it to MVS? I get it. He had a terrible game. But this is just more illustrative of the fact that it's not necessarily a play calling issue when you've got guys that are getting open in the right spots against those zones. And so the Chiefs Raiders game, it was a travesty. There were a few things that went wrong that I think the coaching staff should have been done. But by and large, the mistakes were more execution in nature. Some Mahomes, some the offensive line, some the receivers. It was just a rough game to watch overall. Anyway, to move on, I hope that wasn't too long a segue for one thing. It got into one of my pet projects, or one of my very favorite things that I had to learn repeatedly over the years that I hope I can pass along to people in terms of what's open and what's not in the NFL. Because yes, NFL quarterbacks can hit much smaller windows than college players, high school players. However, NFL defenders can completely slam windows shut much faster than anyone at those lower levels. So you have to take that leverage and the direction a defender is moving into account when you're talking about open windows. Sherry Street asks, which wide receiver do you see them trading for in the offseason? Will Mahomes have a say so this doesn't turn into a Rodgers situation? Them grabbing Rashee Rice and him doing as well as he's done hopefully already helps prevent a Rodgers situation. The thing with the Rodgers scenario, and I've heard a lot of people talk about the Rodgers scenario, one of the problems that Rodgers had, from what people say, I don't know, they weren't taking shots at wide receivers. The Chiefs haven't invested like incredible resources into wide receivers, but they've invested a fair number of resources. They've invested multiple second-round picks. Hardman was an okay player, not a great one, so you call it like a half miss. But he did serve a valuable role for Mahomes, that Mahomes likes him. It just, doesn't hit as high as you'd want for a second-round receiver, right? Sky Moore's not looking like it's going to work out. But Rashee Rice looks like it might be a home run pick. And so you've got multiple second round picks invested since 2019 and beyond, right? That's a very different than the Rodgers situation where they were never drafting receivers that high, or at least very rarely. They also traded a third and change for Kadarius Toney. They signed MVS. They signed Juju Smith-Schuster. And I know MVS right now, it's like, well, that doesn't look like an investment, but he was part of the reason they won the Super Bowl last year, as was Juju Smith-Schuster. Huge cogs in the machine, both of them. And so they've invested, just not as heavily as maybe they could have. And a couple of their swings just missed this year. How they really got here wasn't a lack of investment. I think they were overconfident in Tony and Moore in particular developing. And had they been right about either one of them while grabbing Rice, this offense looks completely different this year. Or had MVS not taken a big step back this year. So it was more swinging and missing. Now, I'm not saying that's okay. And that's something they got to address, but that does differentiate it from the Rodgers situation. I think that's really important to note. It doesn't say that this is an okay way to do things. You got to fix it, but it does, again, it's a differentiating factor. It's important to think about things in that way. In terms of who they would trade for, I doubt they trade for anyone. There's a fair number of good wide receivers on the market. And one thing I think people should take from the combination of 2022 and 2023 with regards to the Chiefs, 2022 did show they don't need an elite receiver. Now, it's worth noting that's with Kelsey, right? Let's say Kelsey over the next couple of years, or after this year, he's just decided the physical punishment is too much or whatever, is no longer, their true wide receiver one. Then you're going to need some replacement stuff there. And then the math changes a bit. But what they have shown is that they don't need an elite wide receiver. They do need competency, though. And they need it from more than one person. And you need to be able to do multiple things. So I don't think they need to, grab a star. I don't think they need to, offer 3 first-round picks for Justin Jefferson. That'd be hilarious and really funny and redundant, apparently. But it's not something they need to do. What they need is good receivers, multiple guys. They've got Rashee Rice to play a certain role. You get one good receiver in the room that's also kind of an X-boundary guy who can stretch the field. Or even like a really good receiver, like a Mike Evans, who at this point in his career isn't a superstar, but he's a really good receiver. I think you can grab him, and this offense is plug and play. And then maybe draft another guy in the second round or third round or something like that. I think they're going to throw a lot of resources at it because they don't want to end up in the same situation. And one of the ways of doing that is throwing enough mud at the wall to see what sticks. And so I just want to make sure I get all of these. I was asked by Steve Harrell, are you worried about the running back situation? Not now that Pacheco's back. I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire has shown he can be a competent backup. It's a bummer about Jet McKinnon, but I think Pacheco and Clyde are going to be sufficient down the stretch. Brian Butler asks, in your hypothetical opinion, what breed of dog probably tastes best? I appreciate Brian's efforts to get me canceled today, and I'm not going to be answering that. The thing that I want to talk about from the Bengals game that I wrote about on the Chief of the North newsletter, you can go check it out, mnchiefsfan.substack.com or bit.ly/Seth really hates money. Shout out to Briscoe as ever for forming that. I talk about the deep ball. Because the Chiefs actually hit on a couple of deep shot plays. This one to Justin Watson, great play, kind of helped shift the game. And so I want to talk just briefly about why I think the Chiefs' fate in the playoffs is going to center basically entirely around their ability to take and hit a few of these a game, taking more than a few, maybe. Part of that is the way defenses are playing them right now. So when you take a look at this particular play that you've now watched multiple times here, the short story is that the Bengals are playing single high safety. They are showing some potential blitzers here while only having 2 linemen with their hand in the dirt. Trey Hendrickson is generally speaking in a rush the passer, but you never know. And they're basically showing, generally speaking, a man look. And that's exactly what they play. They play man, 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 but they don't blitz any of their threatened blitzers. And they end up dropping 3 guys into shallow coverage underneath, trying to basically flood zones would be a way of framing it. And so what they're trying to do there is take away what the Chiefs love to do. They love to win horizontally. They've been making their living in the shallow portion of the field because that's all they've been able to attack this year. It's also where Kelsey's at his best. So the play call here for Watson is designed to take advantage of this sort of thing where you've got him here with man coverage, a single high safety deep. His route's designed to take him inside, force the safety to stay inside, which he does. well, now of course we got to go to the beginning of the play. So you watch as his route starts to take him inside, safety bites inside, Watson comes back outside, hits the hole there, huge gain. That is a field flipping play, right? And that's one of the reasons why these deep shots are so important. And it takes advantage of the way teams have been able to play the Chiefs. They've been able to play them with man coverage or cover three variants, things that are designed that leave the middle of the field closed. So it's just middle field closed versus middle field open. Middle field open is where you've got two safeties deep. And the middle of the field is more open. Middle of the field closed, there's a guy right here, but there's more shots at the boundary. This is probably not going to shock you, but most iterations of single high safety or cover three are considered a little more vulnerable to the deep ball because rather than having two guys back there or maybe four with quarters or something like that, you have one guy back there or three if they're playing some version of cover three. But even then, you've got your corners at the line of scrimmage here, and that makes it a little bit tougher, right? Like if they were playing cover three here, which that brings me actually to a deep shot that failed with MVS. And I'm going to tie all these together here in a second. This is one that MVS should have caught. He had to lay out for it, but the ball went right between his hands. Without him, it's not like this was a complete diving catch. He's going to the ground, but you got to catch this. Anyway, here's why this snap's important. It's hard to tell completely because this is the broadcast view and this is when I wrote it, but you can actually tell from you got the corner there, the corner here, and then one safety deep. This to me, when you look at how everyone else played, I think they're playing some kind of match zone here, and they've got cover three. And so you've got, the two corners going deep. Well, one of the things about cover three is that it's vulnerable to go routes. To a 9 route because the single high safety is not going to be able to get over on time. So if you can win deep like MVS does here, you can take shots. Here's the thing about this play. Didn't work. That's a bummer. They have to keep trying it, whether it's with MVS or Watson or whoever else they throw out there. They've got to keep throwing these passes because it affects how teams play them. This is another deep shot or intermediate shot, more so that Mahomes took to Watson when you've got another situation, single high man coverage across the board. That is not the kind of snap that teams would have dared play against the Chiefs in previous years, but we've seen it more and more now this year as they've feared the deep ball less. The Raiders are playing a bunch of cover three buzz stuff. Check out Match Quarters, the work that Cody Alexander does there. If you really want to get a more deep knowledge of the game, way more than I could ever teach you in a million years. Cody knows more about the game than I'll ever know. And he talked about that. They played a lot of cover three buzz, and what they were able to do was take away those shallow and even intermediate routes. And the Chiefs just weren't. That's why there were guys open deep, and they were not able to make them pay for it over and over and over again. Or if you've got teams playing single high man coverage looks, they haven't been able to make them pay for them. The Rashee Rice play, I think a lot of people have heard about this now enough to where they realize this was a blown coverage. This safety right here was supposed to rotate deep to the other side. They were going to play too high. And part of the reason you can tell is because you see this right here. He's rotating it deep to where he was going to be the other deep safety essentially in cover two. And then you were going to end up having this defender right here, the slot corner, come out to the shallow zone. That's why the corner here gives up outside leverage. Remember, we talked about how important leverage is, and then is able to just sprint up the field because the defender thinks that he's got a safety over the top and that Mahomes has to hit a really tough the honey hole shot, like right about here as the safety comes in. Instead, there's no one there, which must have been really aggravating for that corner. So going through those and talking about them very quickly, the reason these are so important is even if you fail on that shot, so like MVS dropped the pass, but the a defensive coordinator that's looking at this says, okay, they do have a guy who can get separation in that cover three look that can win deep. Yeah, he dropped it, and he's been bad this year. But all that has to happen to change games is that you hit one of those or two of those. Those big plays, right? Those are game-altering plays. They swing momentum, which that is what it is. But they also create scoring drives. if you're on the 20 and suddenly you're on your opponent's 20, these are game swinging plays, or your opponent's 30. You go from unlikely to score to at least getting a field goal out of the deal. So you can't allow too many of these per game. So even if, as a defensive coordinator, you don't respect MVS that much, if you even have a fraction of concern about getting beat deep there by him or Justin Watson, that changes how you have to call the game. You can't call it quite as aggressively. And that's why it's so important to be able to stretch the field. That's one reason why Andy Reid's philosophy has always been making them defend every blade of grass, because it affects play calling. And that's one thing that the Chiefs are going to have to figure out. How do we make teams pay? And how do we connect on those deep shots? Because if they are able to even just hit 2 or 3 of those a game, for one, the big plays themselves will help, right? And for two, that forces teams to play a little more cover 2, forces teams to back off the line of scrimmage a little bit. It doesn't allow them to flood those intermediate zones quite as much with defenders. It means there's fewer guys in the box, makes it easier for Pacheco to do work if they decide to convert to a power rushing attack like everyone wants them to do. It just has this domino effect across the board. So that's something that really interested me from the game. And it's something that I'm really interested to see what it looks like come playoff time. And those are the shots they're going to, even if you only hit one of them or 2 of them, you still got to take 6 or 7 of them in a game. And that was one problem against the Raiders. They didn't really take many shots. And they're going to have to make sure that they know how they can get those shots dialed up, even if it means continuing to throw the ball to a guy that fans don't want on the team. And I get why. Because in part, if he can create separation there, force defensive coordinators to respect something and even catch one of them, it doesn't just affect that snap. It affects the 30 snaps after that. All right, that's what I got time for today. I appreciate you guys watching. Make sure to hit like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things. I will be thinking about all of you next week as I sit on the beach. And you know what? It's a great time to be a fan of the 8-time AFC West champions in the last 8 years, that is, Kansas City Chiefs. Thanks for watching, guys.